What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mac here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed. Lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mac. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mac, and today we are talking suppressors, all about suppressors. And if you've ever wondered what it takes to get one, or what they're all about, or what's the difference between a suppressor and a silencer, and what calibers are right for you, and what can should you go with, and all this stuff, because it sounds like at times we're talking a foreign language between Form 4s and Form 1s and e-filing and all this different stuff. And so I reached out to my good friend Al Morris at Fox Pro. I said, hey, who do you have that is the go-to for suppressors? He says Jeff Davis over at OSS Suppressors. And so we got in contact with Jeff, and here we are recording a podcast, delivering all about suppressors to all of you. If you have gone to my YouTube channel, you've seen that I've done a video specifically on suppressors for a little bit of a comparison. And so here we are with Jeff. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I love it. Jeff, we'll give a little background on OSS suppressors, because there's a lot of different suppressor companies out there. What sets OSS apart? But then we're going to navigate the waters on this conversation here, and what's your role within OSS?
So suppressor traditionally, they've been around for 100 years now. Traditionally, a suppressor is a tube with baffles inside of it, and it allows for hot expanding gases to fill those baffles. They slow down, and inherently that makes it a quieter shot. With OSS suppressors, however, we don't have baffles inside of our suppressors. We actually have flow chambers or flow channels. So when the shot's fired and those hot gases expand into the beginning of the suppressor, they're directed to the outer wall, and they travel down some helical channels until they are brought down into another layer of channels, and then a third layer of channels before they exit out of the front of the suppressor. So all those hot gases that would typically expand into the baffles of a suppressor actually travel through our suppressor and exit out of the muzzle end. So the pros to that are it doesn't increase the blowback on your suppressor or on your firearm, especially if you're shooting a semi-automatic platform. You don't get all those hot toxic gases blowing back into your face when you shoot. So the OSS suppressor really shines on semi-auto platforms, but it's just as good on a bolt action platform as well. Most of my hunting guns, I'm running a bolt action gun with an OSS suppressor on it. So that's kind of what sets us apart from the rest of the suppressor industry. There are a few kind of copycats out there that are sneaking into the market. They're realizing that, wow, that technology is where it's at. That's where suppressors are going. And that's why the majority of our business is actually done with U.S. military, foreign militaries, and U.S. law enforcement agencies all across the country. So that's the bulk of our business. Those agencies have realized the value in having a flow-through suppressor. They don't have to tune their gas guns to operate suppressed like they typically would have to do with a baffled suppressor. So, we've won numerous military contracts. That's kind of what has made OSS who we are today, is because of those military contracts that we've been able to win, because our product just outshines the typical baffled suppressor. So my particular role at OSS Suppressors is I'm the import-export compliance manager. I also handle all the ATF compliance, State Department, any local and state level compliance stuff as well. So it's pretty much sit at a desk and do paperwork all day, but at least I get to be around like-minded individuals. And, anytime I need to relieve some stress, I can step over to the gun range and pop off a few rounds. So it's been a great job.
I love it. There's so much that you said right there. We're going to have to go down this list. First off, working at a job in which you get to shoot a gun, that's pretty cool. What type of range do you guys have on site?
So we have it's just a small testing range, 25 yards. So we're working on moving into a larger facility where we're actually gonna have two separate ranges, one for the public to come and shoot, and one for testing. I'm not allowed to tell you guys that stuff yet, but that's top secret information. If you listen to this podcast, you're getting some top secret info there. So, but yeah, we just have a small testing range, mainly for product development and other testing and evaluation stuff that we do there. So
that is awesome. So I am a owner of two suppressors, and I'm going to give all the listeners some background on this, because what you were talking about how it's a flow-through system so that the gases don't come back and blow back in your face, especially on semi-automatic weapons, is actually, I can't stand about my suppressors, is because if I actually want to shoot it and have like quote unquote fun, you know what I mean? Like just ripping off shots and or as fast as my finger's gonna go. The idea is that it sounds really cool, but the gas burns your eyes so much that it's hard to even look down your sights, and it's hard to breathe. And then you're like, oh, well, then I don't really want to shoulder my gun. Then you're kind of shooting it inaccurately. And it's just really a bad combination all around. And that is more for like the center fire guns specifically. So your 5.56, your 7.62s. And I love the point of a suppressor. So first off, listeners, if you are unfamiliar with suppressors, number one, it is like having a muffler on your car. It doesn't make it silent. They are called silencers, but they're not silent. The only way to truly get a very quiet sound to the point where you are talking about the sound of like a pellet gun is to go with a 22 long rifle suppressor and then use that out of a bolt action gun and use subsonic ammunition. If you use it out of a semi-automatic gun with subsonic ammo, you're not even going to be able to cycle the bolt. So it's going to turn it into more of a bolt action anyways. And I have the experience of that, and there's a video on my YouTube channel, but that is specifically talking about the suppressors that I own. What I want to talk about is more this OSS side, and I'd rather just pub OSS because you guys seem like an awesome company, and I truly understand and believe in this Helix technology because I am exhausted and I don't shoot my guns like I want to or enjoy it because of so much gas back in the face. So,
Right.
what's the history on this Helix design and when someone is starting to look into the suppressor realm, where do you, as a someone who works for a suppressor company, tend to push people towards? Do you push them to like a big bore caliber that can handle everything? Do you push them towards something that is going to be more platform specific? Do you go with a 22 caliber can because that's where the real fun happens?
Right.
What's your take on all this?
So, a couple questions you asked there. So, the kind of the history behind OSS and the development of it. So, OSS started, I believe it was 10 or 12 years ago. I've been with the company for 3 years now, but the founder of OSS was he was a military man. He had a great idea. He had the same frustrations that a lot of us face today with shoot and suppress. Getting all that kitty litter, coming flying back in your face and your eyeballs, and all that stinging in your eyeballs. So he had the idea of making a flow through suppressor, and he ran with it, developed it, won some military contracts, and it just kind of snowballed into the company that it is today. Um, we're one of the largest. We basically have the majority of the military contracts here in the U.S. as well as abroad. And same with law enforcement agencies. Most major police departments, sheriff departments are running OSS suppressors. So I think your next question was if a customer is looking to buy a suppressor, kind of where do we steer them first? So I was in that same boat. I think bought my first suppressor 6 or 7 years ago now, and I chose to start with a 30 caliber suppressor. And I would still suggest that to most first time buyers. Start with the 30 caliber suppressor because you can always shoot sub calibers through the 30 caliber. You can shoot your 5.56 through it. It's a little bit more versatile, gets you into the suppressor world, and then from there you can kind of narrow it down to specific platforms if you'd like. So I started with a 30 caliber baffle can, got into some pistol cans after that, and then kind of started getting into the AR platform specific suppressors. So there's a few things to consider when you're looking at buying a suppressor. So you mentioned rimfire. Rimfire calibers, your 22 long rifle, 22 mag, 17 HMR, those calibers are inherently dirtier to shoot. So if you're shooting a baffled suppressor that's not serviceable, meaning you can't disassemble it to clean it, it tends to build up your lead, your copper, just all the gunk that comes with those dirty powders, as well as those bullets tend to spit a little bit of lead when you shoot them. So you don't want to, the idea is to maintain the volume on the inside of the suppressor because that's where you get your noise dampening from, is having all that volume. And if you're filling it up with all that lead and carbon, your suppressor is going to keep getting louder. So a couple things there. So there are a few suppressor companies on the market that make serviceable centerfire suppressors or serviceable rimfire suppressors where you can disassemble them, drop them into an ultrasonic cleaner, or scrub them out, whatever your method is. But the unique thing about the OSS suppressor is they're fully welded. You can't disassemble them. So the neat thing, there's a YouTube video on our channel that if you haven't seen it yet, it's pretty cool to watch. But you basically take our suppressor, you drop it into, you take a tennis ball tube can, fill it with a gun cleaning solvent of your choice, soak your suppressor in it overnight, and next day you take it out, you shake out any extra solvent, screw it on the end of your gun, and you pull the trigger. And the pressure from the shot actually blows everything out of the suppressor. And so you don't have to worry about disassembling it and scrubbing it. It basically shoots itself clean. You shoot, 10 rounds or so, and that's usually enough to blow out all the contaminants that were on the inside of the suppressor. So a real neat video on our YouTube channel. It shoots this real grayish colored gunk out of the front. It looks like a foam almost, and just completely covers the target. So you haven't seen that, you'll have to check that one out.
I'm definitely going to be checking that out because I have already. So you already talked about how rimfire ammunition is super dirty. I've had to clean my 22, my rimfire suppressor a couple times, and it sucks.
Yep.
And the last thing I want to do is ship it back to the manufacturer to be like, hey, here you go, guys, clean this. Because I feel like anytime you're shipping a weapon or you're shipping a suppressor and you have all this, maybe it's just me, the extra angst or anxiety or like, okay, do I have to insure it? Am I going to make sure it gets there? Am I going to get it back? Do I have to worry about any sort of like regulations? I mean, there's already, because of Hollywood and the ATF, which that's a whole nother conversation about them, but there's this like negative stigma about like what it means to actually own a suppressor. And it is, I feel like it's up to guys like you and me in a conversation like this to talk about, no, it actually is, what is it, legal in 49 states? California still is like,
I think currently it's legal in 42 states, and it's legal to hunt with them in 40 states. That was the last stat I checked. I'm not sure if it's been updated since, but virtually this side of the Mississippi, it's legal in every state except Hawaii, California, and Illinois. And then a lot of your maritime states, it's still illegal up there. But suppressor ownership has come a long way. I know the gun industry, we've lost a lot of battles over the past few decades, but suppressors, we've surprisingly won a few there. In the past, I think in the past 10 years, 11 or 12 states have added suppressor hunting. So you can legally, pursue game in their states with a suppressor. And I think 3 states have made it legal to even own a suppressor in their states. So it's interesting, because you go to other countries, you go to Europe, for example, and suppressors are just an everyday item you pick up for $100 at the hardware store almost. It's, you can buy and go the same day with a suppressor, and a lot of those countries actually require, if you're going to be hunting, you have to hunt suppressed. And that's for your own hearing, first of all, as well as disturbing the peace, basically disturbing others around you or disturbing the wildlife around you. So it's just interesting how Hollywood and legislators have almost smeared suppressors in that way, where they've painted them in a light that's very false. That's why we don't like to use the word silencer in our industry. There are a few companies that have it in their name or whatever, but when you come down to it, they typically tend to use the word suppressor because that more accurately describes what it is and what it does. But you look at all ATF regulations, they don't use the word suppressor; they use the word silencer. And same with Hollywood. It's just a different way of spinning things, and we see that a lot nowadays with media and anything. They like to put their own spin on things, and that's, you got to sort through the BS a lot of times to figure out what's the truth. And when it comes to suppressors, they suppress, they muffle. That's
right.
a known fact worldwide. They're not silencing. So anyway, I don't even remember what your question was.
It's funny because it's just more fake news. It's more just minutia that is being put out into the world that is meant to confuse people, and confusion is not freedom, and confusion is not liberty, and that is not what America is based upon. And so for all you listeners understanding like the history of suppressors, the reason why there's a $200 tax stamp is because back in the day, during like the Bonnie and Clyde era, they didn't want people running around thinking that they could just, shoot people and get away with it. And so they made it more difficult by putting a tax stamp on it and saying, well, $200 back in that day was a lot of money. And so instead of the $200 being adjusted or whatever, it just is $200 tax stamp, which that leads us into one of the questions that I think would love to hear from you is this concept of how to actually go through this process of applying for a suppressor. There's all these different forms that get confusing, but yet it's not as difficult as you would expect if you like just mainstream it. Can you speak to this?
Sure. So yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's not as difficult as you may think it is if you're a first time buyer. and it's actually going to be getting a lot easier here in the next week or so as well. I'll mention that in a second. But like you mentioned, that if you can get over the first initial hurdles, most first-time buyers have to get over the fact they got to give $200 to the government. We all hate to give any money to the government, so that's a tough hurdle for a lot of guys to get over. But like you mentioned, that $200 never grew with inflation. It was never adjusted with inflation. So, at least we're not paying 10 grand, or, I don't know what the exchange would be there, but it could be a lot worse. Unfortunately, when they wrote those laws, they did not write in any inflation into those laws. So it's maintained at that $200 level. So it's more of an annoyance now than anything. But if you can get over that hurdle, as well as the wait time, currently the processing times that we're seeing are anywhere from 7 to 8 months for the ATF to approve a Form 4. We've seen a couple get approved in less than 90 days. So though there is hope there, and we also see every once in a while we'll have stragglers that go longer than a year to get approved. So, but the majority of them are 7 to 8 months. They're getting approved, and it's a fairly simple process. There's two routes you can go. You can submit a Form 4 application as an individual, meaning you and only you would be allowed to be in possession of that suppressor once you're approved. Or you can submit a Form 4 as a trust. And a trust, you can list, I believe you can list as many people as you want on there. Everybody that is listed on the trust as trustees will obviously have to sign a portion of the Form 4, provide a picture as well as fingerprints. So let's say you're applying first as an individual. Most dealers that sell suppressors can handle that for you in house. Silencer Shop is one of the biggest dealer distributors in our country right now, and they came up with a kiosk, almost like an ATM style machine that they put in these dealerships, and that machine will take care of your fingerprints, your pictures, and your application. And it will also save your information for any future purchases as well, so you don't have to go through that process again. So, but even if you didn't have access to one of those kiosks, and you just had to do a paper form or soon to be an electronic form, it's not that hard of a process. It's they ask you the same questions that you get asked when you purchase a gun. Are you a felon? Have you ever committed a felony? Are you a fugitive? Do you do drugs? All those typical 4473 questions. And then you also have to provide, like I mentioned, a passport style photo, as well as 2 copies of your fingerprint cards. So a lot of dealers will do your fingerprints there in house. If they don't, you can go to most police department or sheriff's offices, and they'll do them for a $10-15 fee for you. So we used to, I think it was maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago now, you used to have to get your local sheriff to sign your Form 4 before you send it off to the ATF. But they did away with that. So that's another example of how suppressor ownership is getting to be a little bit easier. You don't have to go through that extra step of getting the sheriff's signature. But basically, once you're done filling out the application, your dealer will send in a duplicate copy to the ATF. The ATF keeps a copy on their record, and then they approve another copy. The second copy, they slap the $200 stamp on it. It's literally a stamp, looks like a postage stamp with $200 written across the top, and they write the serial number across the stamp. So, and then, like I mentioned, you get that back in 7 to 8 months after you send it in to them. And then a copy is also mailed to your local law enforcement official. So that's typically your sheriff. And that's more of like a notification more than anything. The sheriff really doesn't have to do anything with it if they don't want. So hopefully I didn't miss any steps there, but it's not too bad. It can be daunting if you're just used to going in and buying a gun and walking out 20 minutes later. But, some states, does Washington have like a waiting period for?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They just the legislation in the state of Washington is brutal, where I have a concealed weapons permit, and doesn't matter, I get delayed all the time. Every time I go, not that I'm buying weapons all the time, but the concept is whenever I do buy a weapon, or when it gets transferred to me from different companies. Like, for example, I had a great episode with Kelbley's rifles, and they sent me a rifle that I'm going to be using for this coming fall, and I got delayed for a bolt action rifle, and I had to wait 2 weeks on. And I'm
Is that
like,
because you have a common name, you think, or what do you?
yeah, who knows? I don't know. I had, you have the concealed carry permit, you got all this stuff. I'm not a felon. I'm a school teacher, and all this stuff, and yet it just delayed, and
Oh
they don't
yeah.
give you any feedback and all that. So one of the things so we talked about this trust concept. I made my first purchase of a suppressor, and it was also 30 cal. It was about going on 7 years ago. So I had to go through this long process, and I chose to go the trust route because I have children, and I want to make sure that I get to pass them down to them and keep it in family rather than it being destroyed when I pass away. And that's the whole concept of you taking sole ownership versus you having your name within a trust. Is that correct?
Partially. So, a lot of people, form a trust for that very reason, so they can pass it down to their children. So, a couple things to consider there. So, you cannot legally be in possession of a suppressor until you turn 18 years old. They treat it similar to a handgun. So, you can be in possession of a handgun at 18, but you can't purchase a handgun until you're 21. It's the same with a suppressor. However, you can, let's say you were to form a trust now, you can add your children later. When your children turn 18, you can add them, and there's no fee to add additional people to the trust. Another thing to consider is if you're worried about what's going to happen to your suppressor after you die, there are tax-free inheritance transfers, I believe they call them. They're done on a Form 5. So if you own a suppressor, you die, it goes to your estate, it can actually be transferred to your children if they're listed as your inheritors on your will. And that can be done with a $5 application fee on a Form 5. I believe it's a Form 5 is the number on it. So a lot of people don't know that either. So, there's a lot of layers to the paperwork with the ATF. But one thing I've learned, I do have, I think in this industry, we have a lot of animosity towards the government, especially the ATF, but with their paperwork, they have tried to figure out a way to work with the legislation that's been written in order to make it user friendly for us, the users of these weapons. So they're typically, where there's a will, there's a way, so to speak. If you own a suppressor and you want to transfer it to your kids after you die, there's a way to do it, and they're not going to charge you that $200 again to do that. So
Well,
hopefully that
that's
answers your
nice
question.
because that's the absolute rip and a crime to even have to go through that hassle. It's so
Yeah,
interesting because it's just an inanimate piece of metal. It's not, there's no action to it. There's no moving parts. It's literally just a tube
yep.
that goes on your gun, and yet it's treated like it is like
It's a deadly weapon.
yeah, like it's heroin, and it's gonna like do major damage and some crazy stuff. So that's
Right.
interesting. So the other thing is you mentioned this earlier. You said in a couple weeks things are going to change. So
Right.
can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So currently, the ATF has a system that's known as e-forms. So us as a manufacturer, when we engrave a new suppressor, or when we transfer a suppressor to a dealer or to a police agency of some sort, we do all that electronically, and the turnaround time on that is anywhere from 24 hours to 10 days. It's fairly quick to do those types of transfers because it's all done on the ATF's website. A few years ago, they did introduce an e-form 4. They let it run for a little bit, and then it was just their system got so bogged down with the demand. And back then, they were running on some 1980s servers, I believe. So they've since, I think that was 2014 is when they shut that down. They've since updated their servers and their staffing, and they're just about done writing. I believe that the way they worded it is the code for their eForm 4 system. So supposedly that's supposed to launch. I see today's Am I allowed to say the date on a podcast? I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
so all you listeners, I don't typically let you know when I record. Today is Monday the 13th, and this is going out on Monday the 20th. So next
yeah.
Monday.
So hopefully by the time this launches, the ATF will have launched their eForm 4 as well. They said mid-September is when it's supposed to launch. They've already been doing beta testing for the past few months. It's kind of been hush-hush. Haven't really heard a whole lot of feedback about how that's going. But the word on the street is with this new eForm 4 system, it's going to reduce processing times down to 90 days or less. So that's a significant, reduction from the 7 to 8 months that it currently is. So that's one less hurdle, or lessens that hurdle for first-time buyers. If you're looking to get into it, now would be the time to do it. With the ATF increasing their processing abilities, and it would be a perfect time to pick up your first suppressor. So, with one caveat there, though, is this is the federal government we're talking about. So when they say it's going to be a 90-day processing time, I'll believe it when I see it. So maybe give them a few months to work out the kinks. But if they can get that going, that's going to really be a shot in the arm for the entire industry. I think it's going to get all those people that have been on the fence, those first time buyers. It's going to get them to finally commit to pulling the trigger, so to speak. So
Yeah, this is a question that just came on my head just now. Is how many suppressors does a suppressor company typically sell in a month, or like in a year? Like, because I feel like it's such a convoluted process. It's not just like, okay, we have a assembly line, let's just knock these out, and then you get a giant stockpile, and then it's like, now what? We're waiting on the government.
yeah, it's without giving away any top secret numbers from our company. It's literally thousands of suppressors a month are moved by the each individual manufacturer. So tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of suppressors are being produced every month in our country. So, and there's a demand for it right now. It's that whole election year demand has still rolled over to today. It's still high demand, still cranking out as much as we can produce. So people are sucking them up and buying them, and and using them, and we're seeing it. Traffic in general on websites and all our social medias, and any orders rolling in. Every month it seems like we're setting new records. So I think people are finally starting to realize that. And the younger generation as well. There's a huge upcoming generation of gun owners and gun lovers. And I don't think we give them as much credit as they deserve. I think they're we're most I would say most suppressor owners are in their late 20s to late 40s. So I'd say that's kind of the sweet spot. But there's a lot of those 21, 23-year-old guys and gals out there picking up suppressors, and that I think that's showing in the numbers as well as and plus the different fields too. Suppressors are no longer just used tactically, for law enforcement or home defense or target shooting. Um, a lot of hunters are realizing that the benefits that come from hunting suppressed. It seems like every time I go on a hunt with a suppressor, I find another reason to love hunting with a suppressor. I don't remember the last time I hunted without one. Actually, it's once you start hunting with a suppressor, there's just so many benefits that come from it. I don't know if you want me to go down that road
Yeah,
yet, but I
dude.
can start.
Yeah, so
So
I mean, this is there's so much to talk about suppressors. That's the whole concept. Is that you use it for hunting, your groups are going to get tighter. They're depending on what type of weapon you're putting it on. So I have a hunting rifle that I can suppress, but my biggest thing whenever I'm going hunting is I carry a suppressed 22 because I love grouse hunting. And anytime I see a grouse, it doesn't matter what I'm hunting, it turns into a grouse hunt. And the last thing I want to do is blow out my area by shooting guns or whatever. And so, pap, pap, and you get your grouse and you put it in your pack and you move on and you're still hunting. And like that is the biggest thing for me that I truly love, on top of the fact that, so when I first got my suppressor, and I put it on a Kimber Adirondack. It was an 18-inch barrel because I went with the 18-inch barrel knowing that the suppressor was going to add like 6 to 7 inches off the end. So I didn't want to go with a full-on 22-inch barrel and just get a really long rig going on, which is something that you can talk about here, jump in at any time. And so I started shooting. And I was like, dude, this is so nice. And I was sitting in like a camp chair, shooting off of shooting sticks, just shooting steel with some buddies, having a good time. I was like, I want to know what this is like shooting it without the suppressor because I only shot the gun with the suppressor on it.
And maybe we should tell the listeners, if you don't know what a Kimber Adirondack is, it's one of the most lightweight production rifles on the market today. I believe it's like a 5.5-pound rifle without, yeah. So it's, well, with an 18-inch barrel, it's probably less than 5.5. It's a pretty lightweight rifle. So
yes. So here I am. I unscrew my can. I'm sitting in this chair. I obviously am not shouldering my rifle properly because I didn't need to. My gun was not kicking as much as it does without one. And the first shot, wham, I scope checked myself. And I was like,
oh, man.
okay. I
Yep.
see why suppressors are so awesome.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple things there. Suppressors they typically reduce the recoil on the gun as well. So, if you can do anything to mitigate the shooter's flinch, that's going to increase the accuracy of your shot. So, one of the first guns I was running a suppressor on was the Kimber Mountain Ascent in a 308. And initially, when I started shooting that gun unsuppressed, I was struggling to get 1-inch groups. They promised MOA on that gun, and I was struggling to get a 1-inch group out of it. And so I, worked with some loads. I learned how to shoot a flyweight rifle like that. There's a lot of different techniques you need to go into to shoot a gun that lightweight. But then I also slapped a suppressor on there, and that was honestly the game changer. And I got that gun down to a quarter MOA gun with factory ammo. And one of my, I think I took 5 or 6 deer and a few elk with that gun over the years, and absolutely loved the way it performed. Suppressed, unsuppressed, I didn't really like it. I couldn't shoot it. It was all over the place. But suppressed, it was really a game changer. So one perfect example I have was of why you should hunt suppressed is actually with that gun. A few years ago, one of these, the viewers can't see it, but one of these deer on the wall behind me here. Opening morning, first daylight, I was up on a kind of a knob glassing a hillside in front of me and wasn't seeing anything. And I just had a feeling to look behind me on the backside of this hill that I was on and look down into the pines. And there's just a little clearing, no bigger than, 20 yards wide probably. And there was a big buck walking through the middle of that clearing. So, 20 yard wide clearing with a buck feeding, from right to left. I only had seconds to get a shot off before he was gone. So, and I tell the story all the time because if I didn't have a suppressor on that gun, I would have either missed my opportunity to shoot that buck or I would have blown my hearing out because I would have shot without any hearing protection. So basically I had just enough time to range him at 300 yards, dial my scope to 3 real quick, and pull up and pull the trigger and shoot him and hit him right in the heart. He dropped right there in front of me. I couldn't believe it. A standing 300-yard shot. I could probably never repeat that again. But
Well,
but if I would have taken one more second to put in earplugs or earmuffs or something, that buck would have been gone. I would have never had a shot on him. So
yeah, so I just want to jump in here because you're talking about a 300-yard shot. This is offhand, or were you laying down?
I couldn't lay down because there were bushes in front of me. It would have obstructed the shot.
So here's the pros and cons. Like you talk about adding a suppressor on top of the length of your rifle already, and you're like, oh man, if I get into thick brush, that's a long weapon to navigate through that. The benefit though is that if any of you people listening to this podcast are archery hunters and you have ever seen like the quivalizer or the that extendable
the
stabilizer, yeah, that comes off the front of the bows. The concept of that suppressor is that it actually balances the gun to hold way more steady when you're shooting offhand because of the counterweight at the front of it. And then the other thing, which this is getting into, everyone wants to start shooting breaks nowadays because we're tired of having our gun jump like 6 inches off a target from where we're aiming. That's obviously with the magnification that I'm talking about. And you lose your
Right.
animal if you have to have a quick follow-up shot. So everyone shoots breaks. The issue is breaks suck. And if you're
So loud.
if you're at a range shooting next to somebody shooting a break, I'd rather go on a different day. Like, it is not fun. The first time I shot a break, my teeth chattered, and I was like, I don't want to
Yeah.
do this anymore.
Yeah, and the second time you probably flinched, and this is probably offhand, or an inaccurate shot because you flinched. So
Right. And so that is the pro of these suppressors, is that you get to reduce your shooter human error because you're not thinking about what a gun's going to do or what you have to do to quickly get back on target. You just are present in the moment. And that is, I think, one of the biggest things for hunting specifically that is just phenomenal.
yeah,
I
definitely.
I will tell you that my 30 cal suppressor that should, and I don't usually use the term should very often, but should be on my hunting rifle, is actually on my home defense rifle. I built an AR-15 10.5-inch 5.56 that stays in my home. And the last thing, as I started to become a father, like, before having children, it's like, oh, you do whatever because it's only you that you're affecting. But the minute you have small kids in the house or dogs or all these different things that their hearing is super sensitive, last thing I want to do is shoot a gun in the house if I have to. And so I definitely, have the 30 cal suppressor on the AR-15. However, I'm looking at getting into pistol suppressors for the home defense type action also.
Yeah. So, a couple things you mentioned there is, in the home defense situation, you pull a trigger in your house, and it's almost like setting off a flashbang for you and the bad guy. You'll both be ringing, your ears will be ringing, and your eyes will be, whited out because of the flash. So, suppressors, all my home defense guns have suppressors on them for that reason. Not just for me as a shooter, or also for my family, when just to reduce the sound for the kids, and the flash, and just the overall, I guess, PTSD that would come from having to fire a gun inside a house. So you definitely, if you get in a situation like that, you want to have all your wits about you. So you definitely want to have a suppressor on your weapon. And most law enforcement agencies that are doing close quarter combat like that are running a suppressor of some type. Whether it's, we make what's called a K length suppressor. It's in the industry, that typically means it's a shorter suppressor. So you're giving up decibels, but you're losing length. So it's a little bit easier to maneuver around corners, even though it will be slightly louder, but it's still enough to take the edge off the shot. Most law enforcement agencies that are working in those environments are running communications anyway. They have some type of earmuffs on, or some type of microphone and speaker system that they're running. So a little tangent there, but basically, if you're running a gun inside a house, you're definitely going to want to run suppressed. And um, you know, I'm, I don't. I've never been in the military or law enforcement, so I'm not super knowledgeable in those fields. But I'm a big time hunter, so those benefits roll over. There's a lot of similarities in those fields there, but imagine. I think American Suppressor Association did a study a few years ago, and they said that up to 80% of hunters don't hunt with any hearing protection at all. And they said for every year that you hunt without hearing protection, you're losing 7% of your hearing. So, that adds up quick. You're going, just a few years, and before long, you're an old man that can't hear anything, especially out of your left ear, usually. So, that's another reason to run suppressed when you're hunting, because you start losing your hearing. You can't hear your prey. You can't hear a bugle. You can't hear a twig break. You can't hear those little sounds that the animals would make in the woods if you're losing your hearing because you're shooting unsuppressed. So,
And can I just jump in here and
mhm,
say something about this? Because when you're young and you're in your 20s, the last thing you're thinking about is losing your hearing,
yep,
even in your 30s. So I have been a DJ for a long time, and so here I am. Jeff can see me, but I'm rocking a headset. So the DJ, classic DJ, where the headset's on one ear, the other ear is open, so you can hear the music. Well, my hearing sucks now, and when I'm hunting, I constantly am having to like unplug my ears and like do a yawn to like get the sound back into my ears. And I've realized like, man, I'm missing so much when I'm out in the woods. Specifically now, I also don't hunt with hearing protection. If I'm not using my suppressor, I'm still not using hearing protection. And it just is like, what are we really doing?
Yeah.
I guess, it's so often the whole macho man bravado of, I'll just tough it out. Just tough it out.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, my ears hurt. You only get hearing one time, right? Hearing
Yeah.
aids only aid whatever hearing you have left. They don't replace the loss of hearing. So
Yeah.
it's super important. Okay, so one of the things, I have some experiences with suppressors, and I wanted to ask you about this. Two things. Number one, I was shooting on my 5.56 AR-15 platform one day, having a blast. What I didn't realize is that after I'm shooting for quite some time, number one, the suppressor's getting really hot. So like if you set it down on a plastic gun case or whatever, it's going to melt that plastic. And that is something for you to be aware of and cautious of. The thing was, though, and that is more of a side statement, I was shooting, and as I was shooting, now this was a suppressor that you screwed down onto your flash hider, and then you did a locking ring on the outside. And
Okay.
and it worked loose. And so all of a sudden I shot, bam, and my suppressor came off my gun and went
Oh, man.
flying down range. And I was like, oh, what did I just do? I just dropped, that's like $1,000 of metal and tax stamps and all this stuff. Talk about that.
Yeah. So that's every suppressor owner's worst nightmare right there, is watching your can go flying down range. So fortunately, I've never experienced that personally, but we see it enough in our industry that it's definitely something you want to consider. So I'll kind of give a little plug here again for OSS. So on the front cap on the OSS suppressors, uh, there's vents, helical vents that come out around the outer diameter of the suppressor, and those vents are slightly angled. So as those gases are coming out, they create a torque, and that torque actually tightens the suppressor on. So every time you shoot, it's a self-tightening system. So your chances of your suppressor coming loose and having an internal strike, or some type of catastrophic failure of some sort, go down immensely with that technology. And that was something that was developed with a military contract that we won. That was one of the requirements on it. So yeah, you definitely, if you're shooting suppressed, no matter what brand it is, every once in a while you want to check, reach up there with a hot pad or something to make sure your suppressor is not walking its way off. Because once it starts coming off, then it starts to sag, and you risk striking the inside of that suppressor with your next shot. So we've seen some horror stories. We had a suppressor get mailed back into us that had 8 rounds of 308. 8 rounds of 308 stacked in the suppressor, and it wasn't until the 8th round that the shooter realized he was having an issue. So yeah, we've seen some bad stuff, and it's most of the time it's user error. But the nice thing about suppressor companies is most warranties will give you kind of like a one-time, no questions asked fix. But you can potentially damage your suppressor so far that if it damages the serialized portion of the suppressor and the company's not able to salvage that, then they have to engrave a brand new suppressor for you. You got to go through the whole process of getting a Form 4 done again, pay the $200 tax stamp again. And yeah, so there's a lot at risk there. You definitely want to check your system and your weapon, make sure that it's tightened down properly. You got everything torqued down to the manufacturer's specifications, and then also check it throughout the day as you're shooting out a range or whatever. Just make sure it's not walking its way off there.
So yeah, just so important, because And now this probably wouldn't affect people hunting on the back 40 or doing anything more on the flatlands of this world. However, when I
Yeah.
was in the mountains hunting and I'm sitting over a rock and I'm looking at 500 yards downhill in the mountains, the last thing I want to do is shoot and send my suppressor into oblivion and be like,
Yeah.
oh crap. Now, the thing is, the chances of that happening is gonna be very slim or rare. The
Yeah.
other thing, though, I did notice is that with the system that I have, and for those of you who are listening, I might as well just say it because it's a Silencer Co. ASR system.
Hmm.
I've had to constantly retorque and retighten that because as I'm hiking and it's beating brush, all of a sudden it's twisting and it's torquing and it's starting to have a wobble, but I don't know when I'm going to jump up on a animal or be ready to shoot and all that stuff. So that was one of the things where I was like, okay, is it worth having it on my home defense gun or is it worth bringing it out in the woods and all that? And so for me, I made that decision for myself. However, hearing and learning about OSS and this counter torque um, flow through suppression system, I'm like, oh man, I I've ran the gamut of messing up with my suppressor. I've sent them back to the companies, all that.
Hmm.
Um, you guys, like your system seems superior, and I'm not just saying that because obviously all you listeners out there, I bring on a company. It's easy for me to just talk about a company, but really, as an end user of a product, it makes sense why you guys are really dominating the market and setting a standard.
Yeah. So our mounting system, so you basically run into two options in the suppressor world. You can have a direct thread suppressor where the threads on the inside of the suppressor match up with the threads on the muzzle of your gun, and you just screw it straight on. There's pros and cons to that. Um, but a lot of companies, most companies have some type of mount system. So you mentioned the ASR mount. That's one of a few that are out there, where you mount a muzzle device to your gun. You torque that muzzle device down to the specified torque, something like 30 foot-pounds, I believe is the common torque on those. And then you screw your suppressor on over that muzzle device. So that's how OSS operates as well. We have what we call our QD device. So it's tapered thread. So basically, you screw a muzzle brake, one of our muzzle brakes or flash hiders onto your weapon. You torque it down to the spec, and then the threads that are on the outer diameter of your muzzle brake or your flash hider are tapered. So, and they're also reverse thread. So you actually screw your suppressor on lefty tighty, and the benefit to that is you can never get your mount seized inside of your suppressor. So since they're opposing threads, if it's ever getting stuck, you just screw it down on the gun and it will pop loose off the suppressor or vice versa. So, and with it having tapered threads, that protects the threads that interface between the muzzle device and the suppressor. It keeps them from getting carbon locked and build up with gunk in there. So they will stay clean. It's amazing, the way that was designed, that our engineers designed that is keeps those threads clean so they don't get seized up. Um, so you can actually get your suppressor off if you're out in the field. So just there's a lot of different mount systems out there. Some claim to be better than the others. They all have their pros and cons. I would just say do your homework before you commit to one system. But yeah, just know what you're getting into if you're and do your research as far as the common issues with those mounting systems as well. And usually the issues that people run into are user error, or maybe the design was not user friendly enough for people to just intuitively figure out without, dealing with it a whole lot. So, um, yeah, anyway, those are the mounting systems that OSS uses, that QD mount, and it's a real quick mount. It's just, I believe it's 2 quick rotations and your suppressor is fully mounted, so you can get it on and off pretty quick. So,
Sweet. Okay, so one of the questions that all listeners are going to be asking is, depending on certain circumstances, what are the best sellers that you guys offer, and what are the ones that typically go that you would push people towards? Now, you already said that if you're in the market for your very first suppressor, you're going to be pushing them towards a 30 cal so that they can use it on a variety of weapons. Obviously, different lengths and different materials equal different suppression sounds and decibels
Right.
and all that. If someone's shooting for fun on an AR platform, what is going to be your quietest suppressor? If someone's going for just like an all around, and then if someone is more hunting specific.
Okay. Good question there. So OSS, our product line is pretty much divided up into what I would say are three caliber classes. So we have our 5.56 class, our 30 caliber class, and then we also have a big bore class, which we have a 338 suppressor and a 408 suppressor. So if you're looking to suppress, your standard AR-15, you'd probably be looking at our HXQD 5.56. We make that in stainless. We also make it in a titanium. And then we also make it in what I mentioned earlier, the K length, which is a little bit less than an inch shorter than the standard length. So they all have their pros and cons, their different weights and lengths, and their different price tags as well. So anything titanium in the industry is going to obviously cost more because titanium costs more. So most manufacturers, if they offer a stainless line and a titanium line, you're looking at probably paying $200 difference between those two suppressors. So if your first question, to what would be the best suppressor for 5.56, I would suggest our HXQD 5.56 is the model name on that. And we also make that, like I mentioned, in a titanium. But most guys running an AR aren't worried about the few extra ounces they're going to save by going with the titanium version. ARs aren't known for being lightweight platforms typically. If you're looking for a hunting suppressor, we make our HXQD 762 as well as our HXQD 762 tie. The tie is our most popular selling suppressor. It's lightweight. It's 7.2 inches long. It can withstand anything up to a 300 Win Mag. I shoot a 300 PRC through it, which is slightly more pressure. Ran that past our engineers. They said that's fine. We advertise it rated up to 300 Win Mag. But it's, I do a lot of backcountry hunts. It's perfect for that type of hunt. It's 7.2 inches long. It's, I can't remember the exact weight on it. But definitely less than a pound. I think it's 12 ounces. I'll probably pull it up here. 19.3 ounces. Sorry.
There we go. Okay. Yep.
So no, sorry, that's the stainless version. The titanium version is 14.5 ounces. So that retails for $1,300. Most places you can find it for less than that. That's just the MSRP on them. And then our stainless version of that 762 suppressor MSRP is $1,000 on that. So anyway, that's what I would suggest for a hunting platform would be the 762 titanium. Even a lot of guys are hunting with a 6.5 caliber of some sort right now, and that's a great option for that 6.5 platform, or any of your 30 caliber platforms as well. So
I love it. One thing I want to jump in here and say is when you buy a suppressor, be prepared to buy multiple flash hiders for all your weapons that it can fit. And that's something that people often forget about. And they're like, oh, I paid my $200 tax stamp. I paid my suppressor. But now every time I want to try it out on a different gun, I have to unthread my flash hider. And then also there's a difference between threading of a 7.62 rifle and a 5.56 rifle. So that's something you need to buy your thread pitch specific to your caliber of rifle that you're shooting. So
that's a great point. Yeah, but I would suggest once you put a muzzle device on a gun, just leave it on the gun. It's not worth the hassle of having to re-zero and re-torque that down. A lot of guys will even rock set their muzzle device onto the gun just to make sure it stays on there, and that's okay. Our engineers suggest doing that. We don't suggest using any type of crush washer though, because that could potentially change the alignment of the suppressor. But a standard torque, if you torque it down to the manufacturer spec, if they've done their, their research on that and they're comfortable saying that that's the spec you should torque it down to, that should be enough to hold your suppressor and your muzzle device on the gun itself without having to add anything else to it. So, but yeah, I'm definitely a fan of buying multiple muzzle devices, one for each gun that I plan on shooting. And like you mentioned, definitely do your research on the thread pitches on each one of those guns. Most 5.56s are half by 28 threads, and most 30 caliber or 6.5 caliber are running 5/8 by 24 threads on those. But typically, if you have any foreign-made guns, they'll run different like metric systems on their thread pitches. So definitely do your research before you start buying muzzle devices.
Yes, and for any of you who are rocking a Kimber rifle,
Oh,
I
yep.
actually had to do a thread adapter
Yep.
to then put my flash hider on. So there is some steps that make sure you know what weapons you're going to be putting them on first, and then you can make your purchases all at once. Now,
Yep.
with being in the hunting industry, and usually there's like a Labor Day sale, a Memorial Weekend sale, Black Friday. Is there any specific stuff that is coming up in the fall that people should wait for, or do you think like jump on it now because you're going to already have to wait your time to get your suppressor in hand?
Yeah, so the one thing I would jump on right now is so OSS is partnered with Silencer Shop as well as Modern Warriors. And if you purchase your suppressor through them, we'll pay for your $200 tax stamp right now.
Dude, that's a killer
Yeah,
deal.
so definitely the way to go. I'm trying to see if I can see how long that promotion runs. I don't see a date on it currently, but I believe it's good till the end of September. Don't quote me on that, but anyway, I would definitely jump on that. And that's common in the industry. A lot of manufacturers will run those free tax stamp promos every once in a while, especially coming up into the holidays. So jump on those deals. Also, if you are a member of the shooting sports industry, OSS does offer a pro deal. So just give us a call, talk with our sales staff. They'll verify your employment and give you the industry discount. And we also offer what we call our pass program. It's a hefty discount for our law enforcement vets as well as active duty military. So there are ways to save money here and there when it comes to purchasing a suppressor, but they're just like it's the retail world. So there's sales all the time. A lot of people will buy their suppressors from an online dealer and have it shipped to a local dealer, just so they can get in on some of those deals. So definitely, you should never really have to pay the full MSRP for a suppressor. Honestly, there's usually some type of deal here or there that you can jump on. So
I love it. This is a little side note I want to add to all you listeners out there who are in the market for getting a suppressor. You can use different FFLs for whoever you want to have hold on to your suppressor. However, when it's in jail, as in it's delivered to your FFL, but it's not in your possession yet, if you use an FFL that is also a gun range, you are actually allowed to shoot your guns with the suppressor on it, but then you have to turn it back in before you leave. So that is something that you can still get out and practice shooting and get used to shooting it, even but without the ability of taking it home. So do you guys deal with that a lot? People are always like, "Hey, where should I send it to?"
yeah, so we do. We have quite a few dealers that we work with. So if a customer wants to call and give us their zip code, we'll look up the nearest OSS dealer, and we can typically tell them if they have a gun range there and if they can go and shoot their suppressor while it's in ATF jail. So that's a big perk. I'd say less than half of the dealers out there offer that. So I wouldn't count on it, especially if you live outside of a city anywhere. It's not typically offered, but it's a good perk. And honestly, the 7 or 8 month wait, the first time you do it, it seems like forever. But every suppressor you buy after that, it goes by so quick. You submit your paperwork, and before you know it, you're getting a call from the dealer saying that it's approved. So, it's almost one of those things where you submit it and forget about it, and then you wait for Christmas in July almost, and just random phone call one day from a dealer saying they got your Form 4 back. So I wouldn't let that wait time deter you from buying a suppressor, especially like I mentioned, it's going to be cut down to hopefully 90 days here pretty soon anyway. So.
Absolutely. And I will just say a little piece of advice is make sure you save your FFL's number in your phone. What happened to me on my second suppressor is I totally forgot about it. And then when I got the phone call from them, I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't answer it. And I waited until they left a message, and I could have picked it up that day. And then I ended up having to wait another week before I was available to go pick it up. And I was like, no. So
You'll never make that mistake again.
Never. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on, talking about suppressors, talking about OSS and everything that you guys got going on over there. Listeners, go check out OSSSuppressors.com. That's OSS Suppressors.com. You can also go shop on them for Silencer Shop. I believe that's who you guys are running your $200 deal with. And man, just some amazing things. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. Is there any last stuff that you want to share real quick?
Johnny, I think it has been great talking with you. I think the one thing, if I could leave anything, is after getting to know you and what you stand for and what kind of what Wasatch Backcountry or Washington Backcountry stands for, mentorship is conservation. I know that's your guys' slogan, and it's the same with the gun industry, the suppressor industry. The more people we can introduce to this industry and teach them the truth about things, and not let them get their information from the media or from anti-gun agencies of some sort. If we as the actual gun owners can work towards educating our friends and family, it's going to help our fight in the end. That's more votes for us. That's more people advocating for our gun rights. So along with hunting, mentorship is conservation. It's the same with guns and suppressors. That mentorship is protecting our freedom. So if you can, introduce as many people as you can and teach them how to properly own and use a firearm. So
absolutely.
I guess that's the last thing I would add there.
Man, I love that. The beautiful thing is that if you present someone with a gun and their first time shooting a gun is suppressed, and they're maybe it's the person that's like, I'm scared of it because I'm unfamiliar with it. I guarantee they're going to fall in love with it, and they're going to giggle like a little kid being like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, because it is that much fun. And it is something that is a benefit to society to run a suppressor on your gun. It's not just a benefit for you. And that is something very important to remember. You said it, man. Mentorship is conservation. I truly believe it. And we need as many people to be educated and stop being so fearful, so that we can impact the legislation in this country, because God knows we need it more now than ever. With that being said, there's a saying that says, I know it because I lived it. And that is the whole idea of getting to actually shoot a suppressor, so that you were like, oh, okay, I get it. Or shooting a gun and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Why are people not afraid of driving cars? Because there's driver's education. If gun education was taught like common knowledge, like driver's education, then this world would be a better and a safer place, 100%.
Definitely. Yep.
I love it. Well, Jeff, thank you. Guys, go check out OSS Suppressors. You can follow them along on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and don't forget to go check out their YouTube channel for great information. I'm Johnny Mack. This is Jeff Davis, together talking a little suppressed. Hope you guys could hear us this time. We were suppressed this entire time. Be blessed, everybody. Freedom on, and as always, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast, as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.